you for having me at the residency. It's been an awesome experience. And thank you to everyone who selected me to be here. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. So I'm going to take probably about 40 minutes, hopefully, to go through some of my past work and also what I've worked on while I've been here in DC. And then, as Allison shared, if anyone has questions after, I would be more than happy to talk about those. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So I'm reflecting generally, I think, on my practice over the last 10 years, since it's been 10 years that I've been a working artist. But again, also thinking of the last 10 weeks. So, as Allison said, my name is Njaimeh Njie, born and raised in Pittsburgh, um, and currently living and working in Pittsburgh. Had a 7-year stint in St. Louis where I went to college and also spent 3 years teaching high school English in St. Louis public schools. So it's a little bit about my background. I moved back to Pittsburgh to see if I could start a career in media making, which kind of morphed into fine art. So I wanted to start with this piece because it represents kind of where I am right now. This is a collage that I designed for essentially a vintage movie poster. Um, uh, there's an organization called Pittsburgh Sound and Image, and they recently got funded. They recently launched a crowdfunding campaign to restore several historic films made by Pittsburgh filmmakers. And they reached out to 5 of us Pittsburgh artists to design a print or like a poster that paid homage to the themes of our given film. And so I was paired with Mr. Billy Jackson, who is a filmmaker and also a family friend. But he made a film in 1971 called We Are Universal. And it really kind of chronicled and delved into the burgeoning Black is Beautiful movement of the time. And so I created this collage while I was here at Nicholson, just thinking about the themes of the film being, jazz, city life, education, youth culture. And so, yeah, this is kind of where I am right now, just in terms of pulling in a lot of found imagery to create a scene and to kind of evoke a mood. But this is not at all where my practice started. I started out making documentary photos and videos, particularly about Black women in Pittsburgh. This was my first project called Powered by Grace, Musings on Black Womanhood. And with Powered by Grace, I really wanted to um, kind of provide a little bit of nuance to the narrative that had been assigned to Black women in Pittsburgh. There was research and there had been studies saying that Pittsburgh is the city with the worst outcomes for Black women in the United States. And when I look around, I can see that in many ways. And I know that I am in a closely knit village. I know that I've been poured into. I know that I look around and I see women doing and being amazing. And so I wanted to go to them directly to talk about their experiences and their lives and how they describe themselves, even within this larger narrative. That work led to some collaborations that I'm really proud of, including this one with a really brilliant professor, Mam Fatou Niang at Carnegie Mellon University, who was and is doing research on Black Muslims in France. And so I got to travel with her to Paris to make portraits of the folks that she was interviewing. And our work is very aligned. And I found that Black folks in Paris are saying very similar things about their experiences to Black people in Pittsburgh. And so it was just an opportunity to kind of open up that diasporic lens. And, I work in Black and white photography because I really wanted to um, almost put people in conversation with each other. So whether I'm making pictures in Pittsburgh or wherever, there's just a common point and a common ground to come to, especially when thinking about telling stories about everyday Black life. I think we have quite a bit in common. So it's just a way to make that clear from a visual standpoint. Um, in terms of other collaborations, I've been lucky enough to go to Ireland on a road trip with a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Jennifer Keating. I traveled around with her making portraits of Irish women artists for her book about Irish women artists. And also, I got to go to Mississippi with Dr. Kirsten Scott, also at the University of Pittsburgh, documenting Tougaloo College. So really thinking about collaborating with other artists and scholars who are working to put these underrepresented narratives on the record in a way similar than that I am also trying to do. In 2018, I, as was shared in the bio, was named the Emerging Artist of the Year by the Pittsburgh Center for the Arts. And so I created a body of work called On the Daily, Blackness in a Changing City. And this was really my first foray into marrying people and place. I was going out and I was kind of just doing street photography and making images of people at events that I was at or that I might encounter just in my everyday travels. But I started really looking at the landscape of the city and seeing that these places told very specific stories and nobody had to be in the frame. And so thinking about marrying, again, people and place, but also thinking about how the landscape holds a lot of our stories. Um, the, this series, 5 images from this series, eventually became a part of a group show at the Carnegie Museum of Art called Counter Pressures, curated by a good friend of mine, Hannah Turpin. And that's the image on the right where I'm with my parents. And I share that just to kind of show the scale that these images were blown up to. They were all made on 35mm film. But these 5 images were actually acquired by the museum in 2020, so they are a part of the permanent collection. In 2016, I got my first opportunity to do some public art. And so Homecoming Hill District USA became a multi-year project. It was only supposed to take 1 year, but it took a few years to do it right. But Homecoming was a series of public art installations and a digital archive really created in community and in a collaborative spirit that told a resident-centered history of this neighborhood, the Hill District, which is essentially, Pittsburgh's historic, legendary Black community. When you think of like a Harlem in New York, when you think of a Bronzeville, or when you think of like a U Street here in DC, that's the type of conversation that we're having. And so I was very curious when I started out on this project. And, I grew up going to the Hill. I went to high school on the Hill. So I was familiar with the neighborhood, with the history, but I just couldn't wrap my mind around Siri, how, we could have this image on the left of Wiley Avenue in the 1940s, this bustling, dense, you know, self-contained, beautiful community. And then it become today, this image on the right, same street, same place. County Cullen, the Harlem Renaissance poet, nicknamed the corner of Wiley and Fullerton Avenue in the Lower Hill District, the crossroads of the world. So that's kind of the impact that we're talking about. And so I wanted to go deeper into this story, but really think about the people at the center of it. And so I started talking to folks. I did about 50 oral history interviews. They started out as just very casual conversations, but people spoke so beautifully that I figured I should start recording, like actually with my recorder. Then I started doing archival research, going anywhere from the History Center to the back room of the Hill District Library, where they had a cart with like literal manila folders and paper documents to find what stories that people had kept within their own archives about the neighborhood. I started collecting vernacular images. So as I was doing these oral history interviews, I started asking people like, hey, do you have any images by any chance that that feel like they echo what you're sharing with me in your stories. And so I came across, beautiful documents such as this, or such as these, I should say. And then I started making pictures. I went out into the neighborhood, and over the course of probably about 2 years, I was just snapping, and I saw so many similarities between contemporary life and these historic images. And yet the narrative too often from the outside is that, like, the hill is done, right? It's a past thing, but I'm looking at people in the present. So I wanted to bring all that together in some way in the public realm, since this was a public art commission. And eventually that turned into 4 large scale installations that each played on this idea of the hill as home, because that's how people kept talking about it, right? This is home across the generations, across whatever part of the neighborhood they were from. This was the place that they wanted to come back to, and this is the place that made them who they are. And so each of the installations was reminiscent of like a space in the home, hence the title Homecoming. So on the top left, you have a living room, and all of the images were essentially collages of people from the past. So images that had either been donated to me or that I had found in the archives, and images of people in the present that I had actually made with my own camera, putting them together in the same space to think about what this conversation of home might be like across generations and kind of across space and time. On the right, you have a play on like a stoop that was called The Village. Bottom left, you have a play on the porch, and that in particular has the elders kind of looking out on and looking out for the neighborhood. And then on the right, you have a compilation of artists kind of thinking about a studio. And so in the background, I lined the walls with newspaper articles, kind of giving a history of the hill as it was written. But in the foreground, placed these legendary artists, some like an August Wilson. That's also his house, his childhood home in the top left image. But also folks who are just beloved on the street level, like a Mr. George Gist, and just putting those folks in conversation with each other and in conversation with the infrastructure and the built environment of the neighborhood. There was so many materials that I didn't get to put into those installations that I went in and I created a digital archive. So it's still up today. The website is hillhomecoming.com. So I combed through the oral history transcripts, and I just, piece by piece, started to put them together so that I could tell like a chronological and thematic organized history of the neighborhood, again, based on what people shared with me. And so if you go to the website, it almost reads like a book in chapters. And I paired the oral histories with the images that people donated. Again, to say that the hill is not just a story of being a has-been or a story of its destruction through urban renewal, but it is a story of like the people who have and continue to make it home. And then the last component of the digital archive is an interactive map. So this is a little bit more of a spatially organized way to access the history. So I dropped pins in different places in the neighborhood and placed different archival materials and ephemera and photos that I had found at those pins, so that you could just get a different feel for not just what's in the neighborhood, but kind of like where things were. And in the interest of time, we'll go past that. And so after homecoming, I kind of started to do more of the same, but also I think my practice swerved a little bit. It kind of opened up a new chapter. So one of the things, as I've kind of alluded to, I really like talking to people. I like these oral history interviews. I like sitting down and learning about the texture of people's lives. And so I got the opportunity in 2019 to put together a photo essay that eventually became titled Tracing Water, Memory, and Change. And it was a part of a collaborative journalism project. There were 11 newsrooms across the Ohio River watershed. So we're talking several states, we're talking several cities here. And everybody was to contribute a piece that was about water. And so for me, I thought about water as like a throughway, water as a vehicle for migration, recreation, drinking, sustenance. And a way to organize that for me was looking at one particular road, Pennsylvania Route 65, which follows several waterways, the Ohio River being one of them, and really going to Black communities along that Route 65 and asking folks what their experiences were or how they related to water. And the self-portrait that I made of myself as a part of my kind of narrative or contribution to the essay eventually became the cover image of the book Black in the Middle, which is an anthology of Black experiences in the Midwest, edited by a really brilliant professor, Terrion L. Williamson, who is part of this vanguard who is starting this field of like Black Midwest and Black Rust Belt studies. So that's something I'm very excited to be a part of. And on the note of kind of like personal narratives and inserting myself more into my storytelling, whereas before I was going out interviewing folks, everything was like outside of me. In 2020, 2021, I started to turn the lens more inward. I got an opportunity to collaborate with Silver Eye Center for Photography to create an installation and a photo book about, well, really in response to all that was 2020 in terms of the pandemic and also the political uprisings. And what I made was a book and an installation called This Is Where We Find Ourselves, where I tell a story about, it's a personal story, but it's also a story about place. It's a story about the Pittsburgh region through a personal lens. And it's kind of my take on the events and the systems and the happenings that brought us to that moment of kind of explosion in 2020. And so on the left, you have the installation view, and the right is a close-up. I created a series of like 19 panels with my handwritten text as like narration. And, you know, Pittsburgh is a very hilly place. And so I wanted to create almost like a winding path through the hills with the visuals of the installation. So in that way, it's kind of like a conceptual design. And then the book version, I was looking to pair images that I had made in the present with also like a narrative text, as well as images from my family's archive to kind of insert our experience into the history of the place and specifically tie it to the landscape. In 2020, also with the pandemic, you know, I actually wasn't like, especially during quarantine, wasn't going out actually making pictures. But at that time, I had a residency at the Brew House Association, which is a great space in Pittsburgh. It's a gallery space, and also it has space for artist studios. And, you know, we weren't allowed to go into our studios when quarantine started. And so I had like just a little bit of time to go grab some materials, bring them back to my apartment. And so that's what I did. I grabbed a stack of magazines. I had never made a collage ever, but I had been storing these magazines in hopes that I might be able to start one day. And so being in the house for several months was that opportunity. So what I did with that first collage series called City on a Hill was I took images that I had made. So in this case, I had shot this series on film, and I put them in the background of these collages I was making in order to make some social commentary about the times, you know, and also about how I felt like things might improve those if that energy around pushing back and around kind of getting free actually materialized moving forward. So, for example, this image on the right, this was a former housing project in Pittsburgh. It, to my knowledge, still looks like this today. I feel like it looks like a bomb was dropped on it, but people live their whole lives there and we just don't talk about it. And so I put that in the background of this image of this image of excess and decadence, because it feels like too often this decadence is really lived out in the face of someone else's to the to the to someone else's demise, essentially. So these are close-ups of two more of the images. Again, thinking about these societal factors, the systemic destruction, but also moving through to what would it take to be able to just live our lives, particularly as Black folks, sit down somewhere where time is of no object and we could just enjoy the view. And so again, with this installation, I was thinking about a bit of conceptual design, like how to organize an installation in a way that was visually dynamic, but also allowed each image to be privileged. This installation was at the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh. It's called Did You Get Everything? Again, I'm thinking about memory, I'm thinking about people, I'm thinking about place, but this time interior space as opposed to like exterior landscapes. But I think that the home is a landscape in and of itself. And this was a part of a group show called Making Home Here. We each were given a space, or we were each able to select a space within the Mattress Factory annex and design an installation that portrayed our take on what home meant to us. And so, you know, the museum is in a longtime Black neighborhood that's, you know, being gentrified. And so I started thinking about the reasons that Black folks move or leave home, whether by choice or whether by force. And I wanted to kind of hold space for what we take with us when we leave home. And so this installation is all about staging what it's like to move into or enter into a memory. And so I created these collaged figures and projected them onto window screens to kind of fill up the space and make it feel like the presence of people in an ephemeral sense. So I had on the left like a living room, dining room area, and on the right, a kitchen. And so I also included audio of my actual family at our dining room table and at the kitchen table. And you kind of had that sound going back and forth, just evoking the sense of home and allowing people to come in and have their own memories of home activated or reactivated. Coming more into the present era, I got the opportunity to create an exhibition at the Carlow University Art Gallery in Pittsburgh called Flight Plans. And Flight Plans is part collage series, part installation, but it's really a take on this myth or this legend of Black people flying. I came to flying because, quite frankly, I was feeling very low and I wanted to make work that was about getting to a higher place, like literally and figuratively. And so, you know, the progression of Flight Plans was starting with Black and white imagery that I had made. So there's a self-portrait here on the left, and then moving into these handmade collages in the center, where I'm starting to create scenes, starting to kind of bring in research, bring in readings about flying, and also thinking about place. So where have these stories of flight been told? You know, I'm from Pittsburgh, but how have they been relevant to, say, the Rust Belt in general? How have they showed up in Appalachia? How have they showed up, you know, going down south all the way to, you know, the shores where we were brought as captives from Africa? And so going from these handmade collages to these scenes on the right, these kind of like more fully immersive scenes, and then linking these scenes together. Again, telling a story of going down a runway from the present day in Pittsburgh all the way to the past, thinking about the origin of this story of flight. In terms of the installation view, on the left, you can kind of see how I stitched together these panels, again, thinking about entering into a story, going down a runway and following it around space. And then on the right was this space that you would enter into the exhibit. I structured that as a living room, so thinking about the home as a site for storytelling. And I put the handmade collages as well as images of my family members, like ancestors, thinking of night birds, flight in that kind of more spiritual sense, as well as different texts that informed the creation of the work. Um, I got the opportunity to create another collage series called A Lineage of Home. Again, thinking about Black life in the Rust Belt. There's a really brilliant photographer and photo editor named Asa Featherstone IV, who put together this project called Midtones. It's a magazine, but it's really more like a book quality, compiling the work of different photographers, particularly Black and Brown photographers from the Midwest and the Rust Belt. So my contribution was this series called A Lineage of Home, where I explore just kind of like a Black history of Pittsburgh through a series of 7 panels, starting with kind of this jazz musical cultural legacy, moving to the shock of the destruction of urban renewal, to white flight and deindustrialization, to the present, where we might be in communities that are gentrifying, we might be further apart than we once were, but there's still a cause for finding community and finding celebration in each other. And that brings me to my most recent project, which is called Lifting Liberty. So a lot of the work that I've spoken about has been commissioned. It's been in response to a specific prompt or a specific space. This this exhibition in particular was in response to an event. So there's a community theater, in Pittsburgh called the Kelly Strayhorn Theater, and they're putting together a national convening about the future, as it says, of equitable cultural spaces for particularly like Black and queer-led organizations. And so they invited me to create an exhibition that paid homage to a legacy of Black cultural spaces in a neighborhood in Pittsburgh called East Liberty, which has a storied history. Many like jazz greats have called East Liberty home, but it is kind of a ground zero for gentrification in Pittsburgh right now. And so it's a little bit hard to see here, but I wanted to think about the past, present, and future of the neighborhood. And I organized it along the lines of these eras in relation to urban renewal, since that was really a defining event in the neighborhood's history. So I should take a moment here to thank the archivists in Pittsburgh who hooked me up and helped me out quite a bit. Folks at the Heinz History Center, at the University of Pittsburgh Library and Archives, who I had found these images, but they actually, provided the high-res versions and the credits and citations and all that. So I started with 3 aerial images of East Liberty before, during, and after urban renewal to kind of like set a scene on a wide scale level. And I really wanted to place these cultural spaces, like these, bars, clubs, music schools, etc., in the context of what the neighborhood looked like over time. So I started finding street scenes in the archives, and I also started making pictures of what the neighborhood looks like today. Again, thinking about how do we go from this image on the left, which was taken in the 1930s, this densely populated, booming community, to the image on the right, where, people still are. I grew up going to East Liberty. It was a vibrant place in my memory, but it's just this hollowing out across generations, and yet it's called progress. The only thing I can think of that would make it be called progress is the fact that fewer Black people live there now, but that is, I guess, not on me to call. So this is a project that I worked on pretty much well, very extensively while here at the Nicholson Project. And so, my process is to find archival images and do archival research, really think about the places that I want to show. And then I think about how I can reanimate those spaces to make them feel like people actually lived there and not just black and white relics. So I go through like magazines, through all types of materials to find found imagery. And then these are the results. So this is the one dedicated to like pre-renewal. So literally putting people on the street because to my knowledge, or at least in my imagination, this is what Penn Avenue, which is like the main thoroughfare, might have looked like prior to the traffic pattern being rerouted and people being displaced. Then thinking about what it might have actually been like to live through renewal. And we don't have to think that far because, I mean, our communities are still being dramatically altered. So just kind of using an archival image of a street that's long since been leveled, but placing figures there to help us identify with kind of like the psychic toll that might have taken. And then finally thinking about after renewal, when the neighborhood was called, bright and shiny, but it's really kind of filled with holes. What does that mean? Like, what does that do to people? And how do we work through that? Like, how do we recover from that? How do we find each other in community once, again, these systemic changes have been made? So that was kind of on the street level. So I'm continuing to zoom in, and the whole point of the exhibit is these cultural spaces. So I did research. So the Pittsburgh Courier is an extremely important historical newspaper. It still exists today. It's called the New Pittsburgh Courier, but at one time it was the most widely circulated Black newspaper in the country. We're talking over New York, we're talking over Chicago. It was the Pittsburgh Courier. If you've ever heard of the Double V campaign during World War II, like Victory at Home and Victory Abroad, that came from the Courier. So very, very important paper to know about. So I dipped into their archives, also into the archives of Mr. Charles Teeny Harris, who was a photographer for the Courier. He created an archive of about 80,000 images between the 1930s and the 1970s, we'll say, but really his heyday was like the 30s to the 50s. This is a Teeny Harris image here on the right of the woman on the left. Her name is Carolyn Howe, and she's in a place called the Hayes School of Music. And so I started finding people who were creating these places, creating these institutions in different points in the archive. And so I wanted to make images that were kind of dedicated to them and to these spaces that they'd built over time. And so in addition to those archival sources, I also started looking at Black print media from the past. I I lovingly did a long-term borrow of a very big Alvin Ailey poster that my dad had in his studio for a long time, and it was this black and white image of Alvin Ailey against this purple backdrop, and I love it. It was so stark. It's such an arresting image. And the more research I did, I found other Alvin Ailey images. Catherine Dunham's company, Black World publication. They all felt like they were in conversation visually for me with either these like sepia or black and white images against these monotone, like brightly colored backgrounds. And so I essentially collaged images that I found and put them against these color backgrounds. So all of these images are from different places, but I dedicated each one to kind of how I was reimagining a space that I found in the archive. So on the left, you have the poster for a place called Liberty Gardens, which was the Black ballroom in East Liberty in the 1920s and 30s. I found an article about their reopening gala in 1936. And so I don't know what that looked like. I didn't find any pictures of it, but in my mind, this could be what that performance, or like what a glimpse from backstage of that performance looked like. And on the right, you have a poster for um, Carolyn Howe's School of Dancing. In the archives, I found tons of articles, like you see here to the left, about her taking the kids coming to her school to perform at recitals and different events around town. Um, and so this was my take on what one of their rehearsals might have been like. And so the exhibit opened a couple of weeks ago, like at the end of February at the Kelly Strayhorn. And so basically they dedicate some of their lobby space to visual art exhibitions. And yeah, I was kind of the latest in a line of artists to be able to contribute to that. And so you see, I have the aerial photograph as kind of like an anchor point. And then on that same wall, the street level collages. And I'm including this picture as partially an installation view, but really because it captures the ethos of this show and why I do my work in the first place. So as you can see, I have in the back, I've made like a little photo essay of black and white images that I've made of the neighborhood today. And I wrote a little bit of text just trying to help people associate the figures and the places that I had researched and included in the exhibition with those contemporary spaces to say, like, hey, you might be looking at like this big whole block of high rises right now, but these are the people that inhabited this space once upon a time. So there's that photo essay piece. Then there's the space-based collages, and I used handwritten text. Like I actually wrote out the captions to say what the place was named, what the address was, who the proprietor or founder was, and then I added like an event title and a date just to kind of root us in the fact that these were more than just relics. Like they're not just headlines in an old newspaper. Like people actually lived this history. So it's meant to kind of bring us more into the present in thinking about the past. But in this picture is my mom who's like pointing. And she's talking to a dear, dear friend of our families and also a sorority sister of ours, Sora Ann Haley. And so Sora Haley came into the exhibit and apparently, told my mom that she knew or she remembered Carolyn Howe, that her sister went to her dance school, and that she remembered those performances happening around town. So it's just evidence that the past is very much still present. And then I have two friends in the background, MJ and Nina, who moved to Pittsburgh more recently, but they're still in the conversation with the people who have lived this history. And I think that's the goal of my work, right? To put the past in the context of the present and to put people together to talk about our memories and talk about our experiences, because I think memory is a very powerful vehicle for community building. And I think that community building is something that we need now more than ever. I kind of put a grid at the beginning of this presentation. So now I'm having a grid at the end of it, but it's a larger grid. So this to me is a portrait, like a small snapshot of my time in DC, which has been kind of amazing. It feels strange to say that given the times and literally given the place, being at the epicenter of this historical political fallout. But I have met amazing people. I've seen art. I've learned, bits of the history of this place. It's really been a time of community for me, and I've been sitting with that, and that's probably my biggest reflection in all of this. It's how, the world could be burning in a sense. I just told a friend the other day, like these aren't new fires, but they feel hot. They feel very hot right now. but we continue to be like a refuge for each other and find refuge in each other. And I'm encouraged by that. 2 days ago, I went to dinner with some friends and I happened to park a block away from the White House. And when I looked over, I saw a very small action taking place for Gaza in front of the White House. And so I went over and I snapped the photo on the bottom right. And I want to close with that just to say that, there are many different ways to resist. I think what I shared with you is my little drop in the bucket, just trying to hold space on the record for our stories and the way that we kind of love and find each other in the face of like great injustice. But I also want to just say, you know, from Gaza to Georgia Avenue, solidarity with all oppressed peoples. And I hope that we can continue again to find each other so that we can come out of this together. That's what I got.
Outstanding.
Thank you all for tuning in. Any questions?
Calling Springs Physical Therapy. Please hold while I try to connect you.
Somebody is on the call, which I'm not mad at the multitask.
If anybody has any questions, you can either use the raise hand function so we can kind of find you in here, or if you want to just shout out your question, say out your question, or you can put it in the chat. See in the chat. Will you be able to share your presentation via email? Oh, we are recording this and we'll create like we'll put it on our YouTube channel and then we can share it with everybody that attended and we'll share it online as well and also with Njaimeh so she can share it with anyone that wanted to attend as well and couldn't. I'm going to start with a question and maybe this will get like other people wanting to ask questions. Oh, wait, we have a question. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I can't see your name for some reason, but I can see a hand raised.
That's me. That's
Oh,
Audrey.
great. Go ahead.
Hey, Sister Audrey.
Hi, how are you? So first of all, I just want to say brava. This was just outstanding. And Njaimeh, I've known about you and your work, and to have you walk us through it has just been outstanding. So thank you so very, very much. And also because I've been involved with the project with Billy Jackson with We Are Universal. Thank you so much. And this was my first time seeing the collage that you were inspired by the piece. So outstanding. And thank you very, very much. And I will say that I did support Sight and Sound. So I'll get a copy. But as you were speaking and taking us through your journey, I was thinking of Sankofa, the bird who's forward facing but looking backwards, and being able to look to the past to understand where we're going. And you just do a brilliant job with that, making those connections. So congratulations. It was just outstanding. And I'm so glad I got the link in time to be able to join you. But outstanding. Brava.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I feel honored that you're here. Well, I mean, all of you really, but on the note of Sankofa and the bird, I should say that reminds me that I'm actually working on a book about flight plans. So that will be coming this summer probably. And so yeah, just thinking about flight as a vehicle for that messaging and how we can keep moving forward, but with the perspective of the past. So yeah, so thank you.
Anyone else? Well, we're waiting to see if there's any more questions. Maybe we talked a little bit about this in Njaimeh when we did a studio visit, but maybe you could share a little bit about what do you want to do next? I know you're doing, I know you've done a lot of these like public art or in response to commissions or prompts. And I know you do like a lot of video work, not for yourself, but you're, being asked to film certain things. So I was wondering like, what do you, or maybe you don't know, or do you have any idea of maybe what you want
Yeah.
to do or would love to try or anything like that?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I thought that I would come here to DC and find so much clarity and fix like everything about my life, but you know, it turns out 10 weeks is maybe not enough time
It's
to do
really
that,
fast.
especially when you're like really busy for like
Yeah.
7 months. But I don't know. I think I do have some things coming down the pike. So like I said, there's the book. I also was one of several artists to get a commission to put permanent installations in the newly built Pittsburgh International Airport. So it's still under construction, but I'll have 6 installations in there. So that's coming. And then yeah, video work. I have a production company, so I do documentary work for clients. So those things keep me busy. I kind of want to sit down somewhere. You know, when I was putting this together, I was like, the last year or two, I've been feeling like really tired. I've been like, why am I so tired? And then I was like, oh, you maybe you can take a break. It's okay. So I kind of want to take some time to think about what I want to do next. Um, it's been so nice to be here to like reconnect with a lot of people, to meet new friends. Like there are some people who I'm like, oh, like we're gonna be friends for life. But also just thinking about the village that I have at home. Like I feel very rich in love and community. So I'd like to spend some time with those folks and just kind of feel out what's next. I want some time to play, I guess.
Sounds great. Valerie?
Well, kudos, James. I've known you for a long time.
This is my mom.
And I am in awe of this presentation because I remember you working on each of these projects, and I think that they are amazing. I think you're amazing. I'm not just saying that because I'm your mom, but the creativity and the passion that comes out of you, I think, is notable. And I just want you to take time to appreciate yourself and to know that in the past 10 years, when I look at your body of work, it's phenomenal. And knowing your thought process and how much you're committed to delivering something for the world, all I can say is I think you've picked the right profession, and I'm looking forward to much more in the future. But kudos, you're pretty amazing.
Well, geez, thank you. You're showing off for the people. But no, thank you, really.
Okay, anybody else before we sign off for the afternoon?
Yes, this is Jamie's aunt, Brenda. Hello. See, your mom's gonna think I'm copying off of her, so I'm gonna be very careful what I say. But Jane, one of the things that, as I look at your body of work, and kudos for a very, very insightful presentation. But one of the things that I like about you, because I like you because you're my relative, but I like you as a person. But the thing about your work, though, is that you see connections all the time with everything. So we could be driving down the street or whatever, and you see a connection with the work that you do. And your work has evolved. I'm very impressed. Thank you. Kudos for your presentation. And looking forward to you coming down to visit soon.
Thanks, Bren. Thank you.
Gail?
Oh, hi, Miss Gail.
Hi, good
How
afternoon.
are you?
Good afternoon. I'm well. I would be remiss if I didn't put my voice in here this afternoon to congratulate you on, I'd call it a stellar installation. And what struck me mostly is the way in which you used that artistic and creative process. And married it with the historical documentation, you see, of the particular place and also of people in that place. And I think where I may dare say that there's so much contention about the contribution of people as individuals and communities to the history and histories of the world in general, that the work that you've just presented us with here helps greatly to memorialize what has been and what has helped us come to this day, so that it is not forgotten, nor is it denigrated, nor for it to be wiped off the map. And using the technology, the photography, and all of that in order to weave an important story, so to bring a voice and to lend a voice to what sometimes folks may want to silence. So congratulations with that, and good luck with whatever you're following it up with next.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And it's so good to see you.
Anyone else? Oh, yes.
Well, just a brief one. I want to say congratulations. Kudos to you, Njaimeh. I believe that this world needs great artists like you, especially today. Keep up the good work and open eyes and hearts.
Thank you. That's my dad. I'm not a fraction of the artist he is.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. And Njaimeh, thank you for being in residence with us here at the Nicholson Project. Thank you for sharing it. I think for everybody, it's been a really heavy time. DC feels really intense right now, but I know that's true for everyone across the country and the world. But it is encouraging and a good reminder to find, find community and find love and care and encouragement with those around us. I'm really thankful for you sharing that with us. And it seems like you have a pretty amazing family who's all showed up for you here today. That's incredible. Yeah. So everybody, thank you for joining us.